Hey, welcome back to the Too Fast channel. This is part 2 of the prep for the installation of the Pioneer DMH-1500NEX into my 2008 Volkswagen EOS VR6. We transitioned over to my messy workbench over here, and we're going to be connecting the iData-Link Maestro VW1 harness to the factory Pioneer DMH-1500NEX harness. And before you actually get to doing that, you've got to determine what wires go to what. And we start out with, like I briefly showed in the last video, this is part of the wiring diagram that you can download from iData Maestro's website. And basically right here shows a pretty concise wiring diagram. Some of these wires down here point to a additional wiring reference chart right here, which is part of the same document, that will tell you what color wire the Pioneer harness has for the e-brake, for example. And in this instance, it's a light green. The reverse light is a purple with a white stripe, and the illumination is orange with a white stripe. So you need these two reference documents for your wiring. And on top of that, if you're using the speaker leads out of the Pioneer head unit to power your speakers, that's not really, it's covered in this diagram, but it doesn't tell you what wires or what color the wires are on the Pioneer wiring harness. So you end up having to resort back to the Pioneer user guide. And I don't know why Pioneer likes to do this, but they don't give you a nice wiring diagram like this. They give you this convoluted diagram page right here with different scenarios. If you're running speaker lead outputs with without a external powered sub or without an amplifier, and they give you these different scenarios. So for instance, we're going to be looking at this one right here, which is using the speaker lead outputs. And again, this doesn't even tell you exactly what you need to know. It'll show you, like, this is right here, this is the front left. The positive speaker lead is number 7 and the negative is number 8. So now you got to come over here and look at this where it says number 7 is white. So we know white is the positive for the left front, and the white with the black stripe is the negative for the left front. So you have to do that for all 4 of your speakers. And what I did was I basically just went through and I wrote down everything, so I don't have to jump back and forth. I just wrote down what wire goes to what on these 2 post-it notes, and that's my little cheat sheet. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to connect these 2 harnesses together, and you've got several options for that. You can, if you were so inclined, you can use these crimp caps. Now, I use crimp caps quite a lot, and they work just fine. Anything that you crimp is only as good as the tool that you use. And there's a lot of poor crimping tools on the market. Now, given I used to work in the car audio field, I have a lot of expensive Snap-on and Klein tools. This happens to be a Klein wire crimper. And if you notice, this section right down here, which would be used for, let's say, crimping this cap, like so, has a point on it, and this actually digs in and crushes the internal metal contact. A lot of crimpers only have this right here, right above my finger. They only have that. I've found that those are not adequate for crimping anything. You need this type of a configuration to properly crimp a cap, crush the inside metal to the wiring so it does not pull apart. That's why a lot of times these crimp caps and butt connectors get a bad rep, because people are not using the proper tools to crimp these down. So you can go with the crimp caps. Another option is your butt connectors. This happens to be a 22 to 18 gauge butt connector, the red ones, which would be appropriate for the wiring that we're using here. And again, the reliability of a butt connector like this, a crimp type butt connector, is all dependent upon your tool. Another option you could do, also dependent upon your crimp tool, is you could use a male spade and a female spade connector, and you can connect the two wires together. This is useful if you need to disconnect everything for some reason. In this particular instance, these harnesses are going to be mated permanently, so I won't be using those either. Now, with that said, what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to solder these leads together, and I'm going to heat shrink. I'm going to put the heat shrink over the soldered connections. So what I've got right here is, this is just a electronics board stand. It's a weighted stand. You can use this for a lot of different things. It's adjustable, and I'm going to use it here to hold my wires. I'm not going to do all of these wires on camera, because that would be extremely boring for you. It's boring for me too, having to solder all of this stuff, but you'll get the idea of what we're going to do here. So the one sample wire I'm going to do is I'm going to do the red lead. The red goes to the red. This is a switch 12 volt. And I'm going to twist these two together, and then I'm going to solder it. And then I've got some cut lengths of heat shrink right here. Now this is more time consuming than using the butt connectors, but this is the route that I'm going to go. And what we're going to do is twist our wiring together. Now, I'm not an expert with soldering. I don't claim to be. I'm not an electronics soldering wizard or anything like that. Okay, I've got my. You got to remember to put your heat shrink on the wiring before you Don't mind me, my soldering gun has decided to fall over and start a fire. Just kidding. Okay. All right, so we have a nicely wound connection, and the soldering gun keeps falling over because it's in a really cheap stand over here, which you can't see off camera. Now, being a little bit of a perfectionist when it comes to stuff like this, I will solder one end, and in case the solder doesn't flow, I will rotate the harness over and make sure I've got plenty of solder flowing through the complete joint. And that's all there is to soldering. And then we'll put our heat shrink in place. And I use a heat gun. If you don't have a heat gun, you could use a lighter. You could use a hair dryer on hot. That will take longer. And that's all there is to our joint. And our first one is done. I should mention that the heat shrink I'm using, this is about an 1/8 inch diameter. This actually has adhesive on the inside, so when you heat it up, it attaches to the material, so it will not move around at all. I like that type of heat shrink better than the ones that do not have adhesive on the inside. So there's our first solder joint right there. So nice and permanent. And we're going to do that for every one of the wires using my wiring diagram. When I get done with all of them, we'll come back and take a look at the finished wiring harness. Okay, I've got the two harnesses soldered together, and I've got them all tied up, all nice and neat. And let me explain what I found out. So the yellow and black wire from the Pioneer harness here is not used. That's a mute wire. So I have it capped off with a white cap. I cut the end off, put a white cap on it, crimped it down. The yellow and black from the VW1 harness is not used. That's for the foot brake. That also is capped off. The brown wire from the VW1 harness is not used, and that's capped off. And I also found that the pink wire for vehicle speed, iData, the instruction sheets, the iData instruction sheets I have right here, actually say that that pink wire on its harness goes to the pink wire on the Pioneer harness. Problem is the Pioneer harness for the DMH-1500NEX does not have a pink wire. So the iData instructions are incorrect when referencing the DMH-1500NEX. So that wire has been capped off. Some other items to note. You'll notice here, I've got this all tied up, but I've got 3 light green wires here. This was extra wire that I had cut off, that I repurposed. When I spliced the reverse together, the reverse lead from the Pioneer harness to the VW1 harness, I added an extra reverse lead. This is for the backup camera. And since I'm using extra wire and I've got these 3 green ones, I've got them labeled so I know which ones go where. Also, when splicing together the 12-volt turn-on lead, which is the blue with the white stripe, I added 2 extras. Those are also here, these light green wires, and they are also labeled. One is for the antenna adapter, which is an amplified antenna adapter, which requires a switch 12 volt. And the other is for the Blaupunk subwoofer I have in the trunk, the turn-on lead for that. Now I have these little short lengths spliced here because I'm going to put this in the car, and then I'm going to route the other wires up to the dash, and then I'm going to solder these together. That's why I have a short length here. I didn't want to make any type of guesswork and have 20 feet of cabling coming off of this. I'd rather get everything installed and route the wiring from the trunk to the dash, and then I will solder it while it's in the dash. So that is the finished wiring harness. I've got everything tied up with some wire ties, and we're done with the wiring harness. So our next step is to I've got to pull apart the driver's side of the car, pull out the rear seat. I've got to route RCAs from the center of the dash, or where the radio is. Got to route RCA's back to the subwoofer because I'm converting from a high-level subwoofer inputs to low-level, so I got to run a pair of RCA's. I've got to run a 12-volt turn-on lead for the subwoofer, and I'm going to run the video cable for a backup camera, which I will install in the future. That particular cable has a internal power wire built into it, so I've got to run that as well. Also, like I mentioned in the first part of the video, I'm using the factory Bluetooth microphone mounted in the map light. I need to take that out, route that into the dash, and then I need to solder on a 2.5 millimeter jack so it will plug into the back of the Pioneer DMH-1500NEX. So I believe that's everything for the moment. I've got to get working on the car, and I'll see what I can do about recording some video for routing the cabling for that part of the installation. Okay, I'm going handheld here for a little bit since I'm inside the car. First thing I'm going to do is remove the trim panel underneath the driver's side dash, and this is what we're looking at right here. Your ODB2 port is right here. Your footwell illumination light is here, and you've got a T20 Torx and a T20 Torx right here. You remove these two screws, this panel will drop down. You have a standard connector here to remove for your light when you have a footwell light. Now your ODB2 port, if you notice right here. Alright, I think my last section there got cut off right in the middle of filming for some odd reason. So basically what I believe what I was talking about was removing the ODB2 connector. And it's easy enough to do if you notice right here there's this clip and there's two clips on the bottom. So if you put your thumb on this purple section and you push on it a little bit and then use like a flat blade screwdriver, push down on the tab while you're still pushing this, flip the panel over, push down on these two tabs, and this will slide right out because these three clips hold it in place. So that's easy enough to do to pop that out. And you know, when this is out, you've got easy access to all the ODB2 wiring here. So if you want to splice in the ODB2 harness, you know, instead of using the plug, you can cut the wires off the plug and splice directly into this, which I might do. This is the plug for the footwell illumination light. This is pretty straightforward. There's just these two little clips here. You press in and it pops right out. So that's removal of the trim panel underneath the driver's side dash. Alright, so removing this door sill here, it basically just pops up. The problem you run into is over in this area where it connects to the rear panel. What you have to do is you got to pull it out and down like this, because the way it's designed is that when this car is built, this goes in first and then this panel goes in and drops in. There's a tab that snaps in there and here and here. So really you would want to remove this rear panel first and then you could remove this, but I'm not removing these rear panels again because I've already removed these to do the speakers. I don't need to remove these. I'm removing this door sill because we're going to be routing our wiring underneath here, up underneath the dash and down and underneath the carpeting, and we're going to go down, and you can see I've got plenty of space here to get things routed underneath the carpeting. And I'm going to have to remove the rear seat back here, to get the wiring in, but I don't need to remove this rear panel, so I am definitely not going to do that. So the wiring is going to be tucked down in here, and if you can see, there's a lip right here. So if we get the RCA cables and the video cables and such tucked down, they'll go right up underneath this little lip, and there's plenty of room down there for that, and plenty of room down there as well. So some cars it's really tight to route all the wiring. This one is definitely much easier. So still got to remove this panel right here, and we'll get to that here in a minute. Okay, moving on to this kick panel here that has your hood release. If you, with the handle goes right here, if you pull the handle back a little bit and you get your head in there, you'll see that there's a plastic nut assembly that holds this on. It looks like there's 3 pieces to it. There's this little plastic cap that you can pop off with your fingernail, and that will expose this, and you can use a small flat blade screwdriver to get in there to unscrew this. Once that unscrews, this piece will pop out, so you can pop that out with your little flat blade screwdriver or your thumb. So there's 3 pieces here that you need to remove. That's the only thing that holds this into place. Now the tricky part of this is it's hard for me to explain after the fact, but what I did was I reached my hand up here and I pulled this part back a bit, and I pulled up on the handle. You've got to kind of bend this because the handle needs to slide out through this opening. So you're not going to be able really to remove the handle that I'm aware of. So if you bend this, pull this out, bend this, and kind of push the handle out through the opening, you can get this piece off. Now, what you also need to remove your door covering the fuse box, and remove the trim piece right here. This trim piece goes like that, and really the only thing holding this trim piece in is there's a metal tab right there that goes in right here. So you pop this out. So removing that pretty much will allow you to get access to remove that. So I've got some other wiring that's hanging down here. This is, if you go back to what I mentioned earlier about the factory Volkswagen Bluetooth microphone, this is the wiring harness for that. I've routed it down into this area. I have not routed it over to the head unit. This is the factory connector that the Volkswagen microphone plugs in to the factory Bluetooth module, which I do not have. So this is a standard 2-wire. I'm going to cut this plug off, and I will be soldering on the 2.5mm jack you saw in the previous video. So that's the microphone. This needs to be routed over to the radio area. When I initially installed this, I didn't pull all this apart. I just kind of stuck it down here for now. So now it's just hanging there. So anyway, that frees up your ability to route from the radio underneath the dash, down here underneath the carpet, and over to the back seat. So my next step here is I'm going to remove the bottom seat section. I'm not going to remove the upper seat section. Depending upon what you're doing, you may need to remove that. I've already removed it, so I'm not going to remove it again because I'm going to route this wiring through the ski bag opening. So I should be able to do that without removing the top section of the seat. So that's my next step. Okay, removing the rear seat on the EOS, the rear bench section of the seat, is really simple. You basically just need to get in the car, and with one hand here and the other hand on the other side, you just pull up and it will pop free. Once it pops free, you can slide it out. And that's all there is to removing the rear bench seat in EOS. This needs to be removed if you're going to be removing the side panels, because there are screws underneath the seat that need to be removed. So the rear bench is real easy and slides right back out. Okay, next up I decided to run the video cable for the future backup camera. This is the underside of the trunk. There are 10 plastic rivet nuts that need to be removed. Normally they would take a T20 Torx under most circumstances, but I mean, they're plastic and you start twisting on those things and the built-in threads just don't last. They just twist out. It took me a while to get all 10 of those off. Also on the back side, up back here, there's two 20mm T20 screws that you need to remove. So there's those two that you need to remove. The 20 plastic T20 rivet screws, and these plastic little trim panels that go right here need to be removed first, and they just pop off. You can see that there are these little pop rivets, so you don't want to remove those. And let's see, this piece needs to come off, and that just pops off like so. And then there's the emergency release cable. Unfortunately, I already have this off. Once you get the panel drop down, this is going to be connected. And let's walk over to the panel. So you've got this little green cover right here, and this just pops off, and that little ball that you saw would be right there. So what you basically need to do is pop this off, and that little ball is right there. Just lift up the handle a little bit and get in there with a small flat blade screwdriver and pop the ball out, and then you can remove this entire assembly. So the two hidden T20s are one here and one here. Those are regular screws. And the plastic rivet nuts, I call them rivet nuts, they look like this. You're supposed to be able to unscrew the center section and then the rest of it will pop out. But the insides of these strip out real easy. So just something to keep in mind. So, sorry about the phone call. These things have a tendency to strip out, and I'm going to order new ones to put back in there, and I don't know the cost of those, but that's basically what they look like. So that's the removal of the rear panel. Now what I did with the video cable, I've got it tied up to follow the factory harness using black wire ties, and it follows this wiring loom all the way down here, and and I couldn't. This is this black mesh material. That's the factory mesh that goes over the wiring. There was no way for me to get that RCA cable inside there, so it's actually wire tied to the bottom side, and then it goes inside of this trim piece right here. Sorry if that's not in frame. And this just pops off. You can get to it from the bottom right here and pry it up, and this piece will pop off, and you can run your cable inside, and it'll come down, and there's more of this black mesh material here, and you can see the wire I've got tied here, and there's actually a trim piece right here. This trim piece is right in there, and there's another trim piece right there. This trim piece, to get that out, all you need to do is this piece right here needs to pop up and slide back, and then you can pop this up and pull it out. So you just remember, this piece needs to pop up and slide back, releasing that tab right there. Then you can lift this up and take it out. There's also this piece that goes right there, and there's a T20 screw, a silver one right there. So you need to remove that screw to take this piece out. So those pieces need to be removed so you can continue routing the wire here. Routing it down here, and I'm following the black mesh material again all the way over to here. And I've got it zip tied to the mesh material. I do not have it zip tied. These insulated cables right here control flaps and other things. So I've got the wire ties around the black mesh, which is just electrical wiring. So this is where it ends at this point. The next part is I either need to remove this entire panel right down here and route the wiring down, or fish it behind the panel. So that's the next step, but you can see, get an idea of how I routed this wiring. Okay, we're continuing on with the installation. In the previous sections, I'm definitely having some audio problems with the microphone and going handheld with the camera. Hopefully I've corrected those issues. If not, I apologize. So we've got the video cable routed, and we've got that routed alongside a remote turn on and a set of RCAs going to our subwoofer, which you can see I've got the spare tire cover removed and the left cover for the battery removed. I've got RCAs and the switch 12 volt power hooked up to the subwoofer. Everything's tied up. The RCA cables, as you can see, are sticking out a bit, and they might not clear my cover. So I actually have some right angle RCA adapters, which I may have to utilize. I'll circle back around and we'll talk about that after I get the cover put back on. We'll see if I need to use those or not. So this cabling goes through the ski bag pass-through into the interior of the vehicle. Let's transition over here. So I've got the RCA cables and the video cable and the turn-ons routed out of the ski bag pass-through underneath the rear seat back. You can see got a little bit of the RCA sticking out there. I still need to tuck up. They come down, and I've got them routed around the bottom of the seat back, and just to make sure those things don't get caught when I install the seat bottom, I put some black duct tape over the tops of those wires so they sit flush against the floor pan. The rest of the wires are tucked up behind this rear panel, so they route up behind the rear panel and they are, let's see, where are we at? Right up in here. This is where the factory harness is. So I've got all of those wires tied up and running alongside the factory harness. And into the door jamb, there's this seatbelt bar right here. All wiring has to go underneath the seatbelt bar, and you can see where we're at right here. We've got the RCAs, the video cabling, and our remote turn-on leads, all neatly tied up, and this all fits and tucks nicely down underneath the door cell right here, so plenty of room for that. It's going to all be routed up, following the factory loom, up and then underneath the dash, and then over to the center console area. So I'm going to go ahead and put this back together and finish running this wire, and we'll take a final look at everything when it's put back in place. Alright, so I did end up having to use those right angle RCA adapters. I just couldn't get that cover, the battery cover, in there. So I'm glad I had those on hand, because I didn't buy any of those. I had those laying around from another project, and those came in real handy. So in case I didn't mention this previously, the way I have the subwoofer mounted, I've got L brackets that are mounted to the factory brackets on the bulkhead, and underneath the subwoofer I raised up the subwoofer so all of the 8-inch Blaupunkt sub would fire through the ski bag opening, and I positioned it so I could slide my toolkit underneath the subwoofer, just because I needed a place to store this toolkit. And for reference, I don't need to have the toolkit underneath there. It does elevate the subwoofer a bit, but if I can pull the toolkit out, the subwoofer will basically stay in place, and I can remove the spare tire cover. If the subwoofer was sitting on the spare tire cover, it would be much more complicated to remove it and get it reinstalled. So that was my logic there, and that's worked out pretty good. I'm using some rather thin L brackets, so the L brackets are not as beefy as I would have liked them to be, but they get the job done. Anyway, so that's going to wrap up the trunk area. Since we've got everything put back together, we're good to go here. Alright, here's the back seat all put back together with the custom-made grille put in place. On the bottom of the seat are two metal brackets. You might have saw that earlier. I don't know if I mentioned that or showed it in any of the videos. I wanted to just let you know that, to make sure if you're doing something similar to this, that when you're putting the back seat in, that you get that metal bar underneath all of your wires. You don't want it to catch on one of your wires and pull or rip or tear something. So and that would only be relevant to the side where you ran the wires. In this case, they were right down there, and I made sure that the metal bar went underneath all of the wires, and that was it. You know, everything went back together just fine. And while I had the seats out, I went over them with some leather conditioner, since this is actually a leather interior in this car. I did the seat back, and I did the bottoms. Easier to get to all of the little hidden areas if you have the seat bottom out, so I decided just to do it again. This will be about the third or fourth time I've treated the interior with leather conditioner. A little bit of overkill, but I want the leather interior to last a long time. So anyway, that takes care of the back seat area.